All right. So recently I got a comment about polygroups and what are some ways to create polygroups for your model. So here's a guy I'm working on. I don't know, maybe a hitman or a baddie for some kind of spy show, whatever. You can see it's in various stages of completion. You know, I'm working on these boots right now, trying to flesh those out. But I thought this was a good model to use to demonstrate some different ways of creating polygroups. And so you can see right here, we've got the poly frame, and that's how we're able to see the wireframe, uh, how it currently stands, as well as this color, this pink color. If I turn that off, it's just back to the standard, gray material. So let's go ahead and explore some different ways to create some polygroups. So one way, unless I'm going to be just creating a group for the entire thing, one way to create some controlled polygroups is with masking. So hold down this control button over here, and then I like to choose the lasso. That's the mode I most like to work in. Then I'll start over here, draw a mask around it, and you can see on the inside edge it's a sharp mask. So looks like I didn't get it quite where I wanted it. I want it to kind of line up with that line. That's okay. It's an additive process. Come back over here, do it again, and we've got the wrist masked. And if we hide polygroup, you can see it's a darker gray. So if you're happy with that, then it's a matter of going into your menu and under Tool, find Polygroups. And you can see you've got some various options here. But for this one, we're going to go with Group Masked. So let's move that over a little bit and hit Group Masked. I kind of double hit it there. And then now if I'll come back here and I remove that mask, you can see there's this purple coloring on the cuff of the sleeve. So that's been masked. So sweet. We are making progress. And, depending on what you're doing, maybe you're not happy with this here. And so how could we go about fixing that? Well, I'm going to go to solo mode. So we're just focusing on the coat. And if I hold down Control and Shift and tap on this color, this new mask I made, you can see we've got some extra polygons that really should belong to the other part of the coat. So holding down Control and Shift again, we'll get this green box. And then if we do a little slide down to Alt, we'll get the red. So it's kind of some finger gymnastics over here, but green, slide down, turns red. That means it'll remove the polygons that I highlight or select with the red setting on. And, it takes a little bit. See, look, I accidentally did it on green. And so you can just undo that, but it takes a little work to get all these guys. Oops, see, I went into mask mode there. That's not what we want. So be patient, but if you're doing some real detailed work, this is the way to go. And I'm using the drag rectangle mode, but just like with masking, with these two selected, you could go and select the lasso mode. Okay. All right. So once you've got it to where you want it and you're happy with this, with these two selected, draw a marquee, and then you can see look, we've got some of this purple on both sides because we're in symmetry mode still. And we want to group all of this together so that this becomes one polygroup. So we can go back to polygroups and we could just do group visible or regroup visible. Either one. See, regroup you don't want to do because that just basically takes these same groups and keeps them, but then changes the polygroup colors. So grouping visible makes them all the same. Now if we tap out of here, you know, this color changed from that pink color, but that doesn't matter. The good thing is we've got a cleaner separation between our two polygroups, and that's what we're after. All right, so that's one way to, well, a couple ways, group visible as well as group masked to get some different polygroups. All right, so what are some other ways, right? Well, another handy way that I see some of the pros do is with polypainting. Okay, so let's just, we're not going to do the whole thing, but you can see how I've got this coat broke up into these different panels, like it was made up of different you know, heavy fabric pieces or leather. Well, keep that in mind. So we're on our little standard brush, and I want to get a smaller brush size, bigger than that. And then I want to turn on RGB because I want it to actually draw on the surface. I'm going to get out of polyframe mode. And then I also want to go ahead and hit this little paintbrush next to the subtool, the model that I'm on. And then let's get us a black color. And let's just draw in here. Okay, you can see it's working. Whoop. Looks like somehow, for some reason, we filled the entire thing with black. So let's do this. We're going to fill it with white. All right. So now white is the color that's on there. And then we're going to go grab us our black. Yeah, we'll just toggle those two around. Okay. One thing to note is it looks like I'm sculpting as well, which I want to turn that off. So turn off the Z intensity. Scroll out all the way down. Turn that off all the way. And right now, you can see, depending on how hard I press, I get different level of black. I think I want an alpha that's a little more solid. Okay, that'll make it easier. And then I can also, yeah, RGB intensities all the way up. So I want to make sure that's there. Turn down the focal intensity. So that gives me a sharp, maybe we don't need that. Too sharp on the edges for my liking. All right, whatever. So, okay. All right, so we got our brush, and then we've got these different panels, and what you can do is draw lines with your polypaint black to define areas for your polygrouping. All right. So this, normally I would probably want to do this on a, a mesh that's just single poly, wide. It's not, doesn't have any thickness like this. But I was already past that part on this particular character. So, I'm having to draw along the bottom here to say that I don't want this mask to go in on the inside. Okay, so we'll just do this much of it. But ideally, you would do this to the entire model, and these black lines basically are the boundaries for polygroups. Okay, so let's turn polyframe back on, and then we'll go into our polygroups. We'll scroll down to from polypaint, and you can play with this tolerance here, but let's just go ahead and hit that, and looky there. It created a polygroup, if you can see that, from those lines. So, which comes in handy for when we, use Control and Shift and tap on our polygroup. See how those middle areas just disappeared, just leaving us with these individual panels, which become nice. So now if I were to have those separated there, let's just see what happens. I think at least this middle piece is completely disconnected. If I were to go to Polygroup, Auto Polygroups, see how it created a group for this one that's separate from the rest because it is a completely separate piece of geometry based on what's currently visible, right? So then if I tap here, those blue lines come back. So if you take your time and you draw these poly lines nice and thick and really solid black, dark, then it's a good way to split up these different panels as different polygroups. And you might say, well, why would I do that? And I would say to you, that is a fair question. Well, when you're doing hard surface pieces, and this video doesn't necessarily contain the scope for that, but you can basically take your ZRemesher and go to your ZRemeshing options, and then there's the polypaint mode, but we're going to work with groups, so we'll say freeze groups. Well, keep groups, okay, and let's adjust our target polygon count here at ZRemesh, and it's thinking, but you can see how it kept those and created some nice geometry. And what we're really focusing on is here, these middle lines are kind of throwaway and we would have gotten rid of them, but because this was its own unified piece, essentially isolated piece, we've got a nice edge loop that goes all the way around it, which comes in handy for creating nice panels. So we can extrude these down. We can go to our creases and say, crease poly group. So just opens up a lot of opportunities. And if you want to learn more about that, let me know, and we will explore that in another video. All right, let's get back and do some of this stuff because it kind of messes me up on what I'm working on. All right, so there are some options there, okay? What are some other ways? Well, let's keep going. Let's say we're working on the hands, for example. So I'm gonna, well, let's just go to isolation mode. Where are my hands? All right, get out of isolation mode. Click on just the hands. All right, I'm getting my commands mixed up. Okay, got the hands here. And right now, if we turn on polyframe, you can see it's all just one poly group. And it's actually two. The other hand is its own color as well, which not necessarily what we want. So I'm just gonna do group visible, so they're all the same. And let's say I wanted these individual fingers to be their own group. Well, you could use the masking technique that we just went over, or maybe you want to use your selection tool here and select lasso, and then select one of these fingers. And then it's just as simple as saying group visible. And now look at there, we got us our own finger. Okay, our own polygroup for a solitary finger. Do another one, group visible. Okay, those are close, but they're actually different. And then if we hit on both of these again, tap just that one, it hides everything else. So that's a quick way to isolate pieces of your subtool. Let's change that. Okay, so now they look a little bit more different. Same thing as before. You know, maybe I should have included more of that. So just do that, draw a shape, start to select these, slide over till it's red. Those pieces that are no longer visible, whoops, we got to do the draw. Okay, now we can see it's all part of what's visible, and we can group the visible again. So that's another quick way to do it. And why would we want this? Well, let's say we're sculpting here. I'm going to turn off RGB, make sure my Z intensity is up. I've got my move brush, and I'm working in here, and I've decided, you know, I want this finger to be thicker. And I start to move. Well, that's not good. It's squishing this finger over here. Okay, well, I could use this selection and just work on it here, but maybe I want to be able to see them both. So I could hit Control Tap to mask everything, and then draw a shape. Come on, or just tap. Now it's all visible. This one's masked. I can tap to toggle the mask, and then now I can work on it, move it around, and it doesn't affect anything else. So that's one way to use polygroups for this scenario. Another way is if we go to our menu, back out to the brush, we've got Automasking, and I believe, so we've got topological, yeah, mask by polygroups. So that's what we want. So you can, you know, play with this little lever right here to decide how well that's all going to work. But without anything masked, now I go to move things. Okay, that didn't work so well. But that's because maybe my brush was straddling multiple areas at once. Say we just grab that one area, that does the trick. But that kind of can be done without this. So let's not add any more mask by, let's turn this even further down. Okay, that seems like maybe it, yeah, see, that's having a lot less effect. Okay, maybe even take it down even further, like to almost 0. And see, I'm overlaying different parts. Yeah. So it's going to work with the areas that I'm overlaying, but a little less. So, you know, not quite as clean as the first option I showed you there, but you can see that it is aware. Honestly, there's a good brush for that exact scenario here. Move topological. So that way, you're grabbing over here. It's just affecting the one that you're first started with. So, figure out what works best for you. But if you want it to be a for sure thing, use that masking technique that I showed you initially, where, and thanks to polygroups, we were able to mask things a lot easier. And you might say, well, what, I could have just drawn a quick mask around it and worked that way. And that's true. You could have. And in a lot of cases, that's the way to go. But as things get maybe more detailed, or maybe they're overlapping each other, maybe there's a fingernail or different things, then that gets a little repetitive, if not impossible. So there you go. Those are kind of the go-to masking techniques that I use with regard to kind of the traditional, just not masking techniques, polygroup techniques, based on this drop down. And you can play with some of these other options. But there's another way, thanks to Zmodeler. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you may have watched me use this technique. But we'll come down to the boot because it's got bigger polygons, and that's usually where I'll use my favorite Zmodeler. Okay, so if you go to Polygon Actions, scroll down to Polygroup, click on that, you can see, you've got different ways of selecting, and you can even limit it to specific polygroups, which comes in super handy. But in this case, we're creating polygroups, right? So polygroup right now, with these settings, you've got one group ID. So everything that you select and run this tool on, it'll just be the same. Assignment, do you override it? Are you adding it? Are you picking existing? Coverage, is it the full area that you have selected or random? So in most cases, I'm sticking to these settings here. But so let's say I want to add a mask to the top of these boots here, like a boot cuff. Well, I'm going to hold down Alt to select temporary polygroup. That's what this white polys are doing. So now anything that's white, even though I've got a single poly setting, anything that's white is going to be affected. So if I tap on that, boom, it's a new polygroup, right? So that's a pretty quick, clean way to do things when you're working with Zmodeler on a higher, or actually a lower poly model. I mean, it can work on the higher stuff as well, but this is where I find it most valuable. Let's do one more. You can see I've got some fancy polygrouping going on here. But let's say I just wanted to isolate front of the bottom of the tread here. Select all that, tappy tappy, it's its own polygroup. And it looks close to this, but it's actually slightly different. Okay, so that's a little bit on polygrouping. I hope that you found this helpful. And if you did, give me a like and a subscribe, right? And drop in the comments anything else you'd like to see. And until next time, keep on creating.